Hello, good morning, everyone. This discussion is being organized on behalf of a coalition of various civil society organizations and individuals called Bangalore for Justice and Peace. My name is Aishwarya. I'm with the PUCL, who's also one of the member organizations of the coalition Bangalore for Justice and Peace. So far, we have been active in Bangalore on responding to issues pertaining to human rights violations in Palestine and holding the Indian government accountable when it comes to partnering with the Israeli government. Um, with this discussion, we would hope to start conversations around issues of international law and human rights violations in different parts of the world. And with us today, we have Kishore, who's also a member of Bangalore for Justice and Peace, as well as a member of PUCL. He has been actively writing on issues pertaining to war and conflict within the African region, within different countries in the African region. So today he is going to be talking about the Sudanese civil war. First January was 70 years since the Sudanese Independence Day, and I warmly welcome him and I thank him for taking the effort and time to put together this presentation for us. Um, uh, Over to you, Kishore. Okay.
Is my mic on?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you, Aishwarya. Um, so uh, this talk is something that, as we've been discussing it, the way I usually will begin any of my writings and my articles is to talk about the more recent events that have been happening within the conflict. And this one has been very difficult because every week something new seems to keep happening. On the 21st of January, the Rapid Security Forces, one of the parties of the conflict, detained 17 members of the Zagwa community. And yeah, every 2 3 days you get like some major disturbing story about schools being shut down, children being kidnapped, drone strikes that are going on. It's actually really hard to like keep up and keep uh, tabs with what's going on in the conflict itself. Um, the 9th of January marks the 1000th day of the conflict, hence the title of the talk. We were actually at one point in time considering doing it close to the 70th independence anniversary of Sudan. Um, the story I'm going to say, of course, is going to be very disheartening because I will be covering different aspects of the conflict, especially trying to put it into a broader historical and geopolitical context. I'm hoping that this can be the beginning of a series of endeavors to try to bring awareness to the violence and the wars that are happening in Africa. So, yes, just to give the standard introductions, Sudan is a country with roughly 50 million people. It's basically three times the population of Bangalore, an area that's roughly half the size of India. It's bordered by Chad on the west, Ethiopia on the east, Egypt on the north, Uganda on the south. I'm not just saying that. Its locations actually are important aspects in trying to understand the nature of the conflict itself. Um, so this is my map of Sudan itself. So the areas we're going to be talking a lot about, I think people who, it's hard for me to point to the map, but you have on the western side the Darfur region, where most of the conflict is happening. And now there's also more towards the center, the Kordofan region, where the UN has recently um, said that famine conditions have expanded from Darfur to the Kordofan region. So this is actually where a lot of the conflict is going on. So for those of us who are watching the video, this is mostly the western and southern regions of current Sudan, where most of the conflict is happening. Now, my talk is going to have three parts to it. First part is where I'm going to be talking about the war itself. The second part, I'm going to try to put this into a more geopolitical context, where I'll explain how different countries have gotten drawn into the conflict and um, why their interests are the way that they are. And especially because this is a talk for Bangalore for Justice Peace, I will explain how Israel is how it's connected to the conflict. Then last part, I want to give kind of a broad understanding of the history of the conflict and Sudan, like how it came to this situation that we have right now. So this is, like I said before, 9th January marked the thousandth day of the Sudanese civil war. It's a war that where estimates of death have been about 30,000 to 1.5 lakh people. But most likely, every number that I give, these are based off of official estimates, and they're very likely underestimates of what has happened. Nearly 1.5 crore people have been displaced from their homes. Many of them have had to flee to other countries. Chad is actually Chad and Uganda as well are two places where many of the refugees have gone to. In the at right now, there are about six famines in the world, and I think there was Palestine, Yemen, Haiti, Congo, Tigray, and Darfur. Darfur is one of the major sites of famine in the going on in the world. Have confirmed famine conditions are going on in the world. And most of these cases, when you look at the list, people usually mention countries. Palestine is a country, Yemen is a country. It's actually like Darfur, specifically the western part of Sudan, that is been given um, has been considered to be under famine conditions. So this is a very brutal war. It's a very long-standing war, and it's a war that's been going on for a long time. I'm going to be talking about the past 3 years of it, but I think I'm going to get to the later part of my talk. You're going to hear about actually how the war has many decades of background that go into it. So here is our war timeline. The war breaks out in October 2021. It's actually two wings of the government or the existing government of Sudan that get into it. One is the Sudanese armed forces, and the other is the rapid support forces. The Sudanese armed forces, I'll be referring to them as the SAF, are led by General Burhan, and the rapid support forces are led by Mohammed uh, Hemedi Dagalo. Hemedi is how he's popularly referred to. This is how I'll be referring to him going forward. The war really breaks out in 15th of April, 2023. And then you see the rapid support forces are actually able to maintain substantial control in the western part of Sudan, starting from earlier last year, um, where they're able to establish what they call the government for peace and unity in exile. There's back and forth fighting that continues until this day. In October, we had one of the biggest military campaigns, the fall of Al Fashir, or a siege which has lasted for over 500 days up to that point in time. The Rapid Support Forces captures this one major center that exists in Western Sudan, which is in Darfur. To kind of one thing I was hoping to do, because this is a talk that's being given in the alternative law forum, is try to explore some of the legal aspects of the conflict. And I think the best way to understand legal aspects of this is to look at the works done by the. There are two fact findings. One has been completed, one is being initiated right now, that is being conducted by the United Nations, that is looking at the war in Sudan. Um, okay, something has come up. Okay. Yeah, in 2023, 2024, fact finding had been conducted by the United Nations to look at the scale of violence that is going on and legally what could be done. It did point out that the Rapid Support Forces, one of the parties of the conflict, were responsible for large scale sexual violence, and have been responsible for 82% of the incidences of sexual violence that they documented. They didn't say that the SAF was innocent, but they did point out to the sheer scale that was being done by the RSF. There's also a lot. There's a also a lot of ethnic targeting that was being done by the RSF against many of the non-Arab black communities that exist in Sudan. This would include the Masalit, the Iringa, the Zagwa, amongst many others, the Fur community, many others that exist there. And these are not just incidental; they're not just because these people happen to be in the region, but like there are a lot of instances where they were specifically targeted because of their ethnicities. Attackers used many um, derogatory and racist slurs when attacking them. And this has also led to other forms of violence as well, which has included uh, trafficking, kidnapping, certain forms of slavery. Many of all of these amount to crimes against humanities, and that it is important to address this. I think I'll just skip over this, but one should actually look through the fact-finding report of the UN. You actually see like large lists of various forms of atrocities that have basically damaged the healthcare infrastructure of the region, that have caused famines, the famine condition to break out, that has prevented any humanitarian intervention from coming in. And all of this is being put at the RSF's. Actually, most of this is being put at the RSF's doorstep. There's recently there was a it was declared. I think Sudan has right now had one of the longest school closures in recent history. So, like a lot of children have been denied their due education. Many ways in which human rights have been violated. Uh, the big headline from the fact finding report is that they called the civil war in Sudan as the war of atrocities, and the fact finding report had happened, but since then it feels like it almost gets worse and worse. Um, so I think it's in the first half of 2025, which is after the fact finding report. Um, like they almost match the number of people who've died in 2024. It's gotten much worse. There are many. There's a huge refugee crisis that's come up as a result of the conflict. I mentioned some of them have gone to Chad, some of them have gone to Uganda. Chad on the west, Uganda on the south. So yeah, that's kind of the scale of the conflict right now. Um, for the interest of time, I feel very strange about like just kind of going, speeding through the long list of human rights violations that have come up in Sudan because this is actually the meat of what has been going on. And these are all things that are not just, I wouldn't say that they're well documented. They are, if anything, just underreported about what's been going on. Stories of torture, stories of death, stories of sexual assault, stories of kidnapping, slavery. I mean, everything just kind of uh, keeps going on. So maybe what would like to focus on is how the fact-finding report understood the legal dimension of the claim. As by any fact-finding report, the concern has been about a breakdown of law and order that has happened in Sudan, and they just kind of debate. I think there's two levels of the discussion. One is what kind of law is applicable, and the two is how does that law get implemented. Um, so it is at least the way the fact-finding report places the law issue is that they see two branches of law that comes in. One is under the framework of human rights, and the other is under humanitarian rights. So human rights would be a question. It's a question about people's right um, to life, and how human rights could be protected in the context of the civil war. The humanitarian rights issues talks about when there's a war that comes in, what are the responsibilities of the various parties in the war? Like, what is the minimum amount of decency that you can expect in a context of war? So the fact finder report kind of covers these two aspects. Um, the fact finding report points out that the problem with Sudanese law specifically, or appealing to domestic law, is that it does not transfer accountability up the chain. So, because there are many of these generals who are commanding soldiers to do various forms of uh, uh, killing people and doing various things. There is liability under Sudanese law to prosecute those people, but it doesn't actually challenge the drivers of the conflict, which are the commanders the top at the top of the chain. So the fact finding report was trying to ask the question about how do you hold basically the generals responsible for actions of the soldiers during the context of a civil war, and it draws upon this idea of command responsibility, where criminal liability can be passed up the chain when things are happening in the context of war. So, command responsibility basically says that if you've commanded your soldiers or you commanded your subordinates in order to commit certain acts, human rights violations that come as a response to those acts, um, will you're liable for the actions of the people who've been under your command in order to do that. Yeah, so yes, I think I've already covered this issue of humanitarian law versus human rights law. Just kind of just um, I don't think I need to go into the details of that. Is it?
Go for it.
Yeah. Yeah. Humanitarian law basically are things that come as a result of are covered by the Geneva Convention, and they basically in this is a question of like how do you consider law in the context of war, and basically people can be prosecuted if they do things that are beyond necessary or are out of proportion. That's the kind of thing. And there, especially when it comes to prisoners of war, people who are, so when a group of soldiers capture people, there are some basic human rights you're supposed to be able to give to anyone that is somehow been captured by people under your command, and that would mean like basic access to food, basic access to medicine, all of these sorts of things. As long as the people who are captured are not active threats to your soldiers, you're required to maintain some basic human things. And we can compare this also to international human rights law, which is something that's basically said to be more universal. Here there's this question that comes up about who enforces the human rights. So, like, you can't simply say that a person has human rights. There has to be some sort of mechanism of not just protection of human rights, but also remedy when those rights get violated. So the state of Sudan is the governing authority in this particular case, where they're supposed to, like, no matter what happens, no matter what kind of war is going on, they are responsible to maintain the human rights obligations that are going on. So this is an analysis that has come out from the UN human rights report. So this is the framework. Now there's a question of how do you enforce it. Um, so the report, of course, says that if um, the two people who are clearly at the heads of the conflict are the leaders of the Sudanese armed forces and the rapid support forces. The yeah, the Sudanese armed forces is basically run by General Burhan, and he's the one who is responsible for anything that happens, kind of as a result of the SAF for doing anything. And the rapid support forces are run by Hamadi Dagalo, and anything that happens as a result of the RSF is basically put into this. This is important to state because right now the RSF is actually controlling territory within Sudan. So like there is some there's as the RSF gains territory within Sudan, they increase their liability of the human rights violations that have gone on in Sudan. The doctrine of command responsibility applies both to formal and effective command. De jure, de jure and de facto. These are the two forms of command that is there, and they're looking at the framework in order to establish uh, what how to enforce anything like that. They looked at the international criminal courts as a way of enforcing it, and they make reference to the Rome Statute, which covers basically everything that's been happening in Sudan. Not the war began in 2021, but it goes back to 2002, and I'll explain when I get into the history of Sudan. I can explain a little bit better about why 2002 became an important is when it goes back. But they said that you can basically take the existing mandate that it has existed on Sudan from back then and just extend it over to what's been going on today. They said it's also possible that the UN Security Council could make a referral on this case, or there could be an ad hoc declaration made by Sudan. The Sudanese government itself could make a declaration under the Rome Statute, bringing the ICC to cover jurisdiction within Sudan. Um, so I'm going to just skip this one section. And that's basically an understanding of the legal framework in which we can understand the conflict that's gone on in Sudan. This is a very UN-centered approach of going into it. Unfortunately, because I have very limited time and space to be able to discuss it. There are, of course, many other frameworks that people have talked about. Whether this could be put under the African Union um, is, I think, one thing that I remember talking about. But yeah, it's just a way of giving us. Um, I'm going to now proceed to the second part of my talk, where I'm going to be talking about the geopolitics of the conflict and looking at how different countries are going on. I think one of the I think the reasons why people got very interested in this is because there was a lot of talk over the past 2-3 months about how the UAE has been funding the RSF, and I think it's mostly been in the news about how Western Sudan has a lot of gold mines, and because of that, the UAE has been importing a lot of that gold, and because of that, they've been getting involved in the conflict. But I would say the conflict's a little bit deeper than that, and I think we need to understand the depth of what has been going on. So um, basically, there are many ways to cut this up, and what I'm offering is just one way of understanding how this international how this conflict is. But one way of understanding is saying that over the past 5-10 years, there's been a growing rift between the UAE government and the Saudi Arabian government, and that rift has been playing out in multiple conflicts. Um, one, for example, the Yemenis conflict that's been playing out. Sudan is another one. The reason for this isn't just mineral extraction, it's also because of access to ports. Many of you have been, I don't know if anyone has been following the story about how about the politics about recognizing Somaliland, whether it's an independent country or whether it's part of that's just because it's in this basic area um, that governs access to the Suez Canal, and that's where the whole thing has been going up. So while the UAE and Saudi Arabia historically have been strong Western allies in the region, um, especially in recent years, there has been more like conflict that's been coming up between these two, and these conflicts have been playing out in different parts of the world. Um, and especially more recently, and this has always been in that that stretch of land I've said earlier. This the waterway axis is pretty much where a lot of this has been playing out. Yeah. The UAE has, of course, some objective interest in supporting the rapid support forces over the SAF, mainly because the rapid support forces. There's two things about them. One is that they control the western side of Sudan, where a lot of the gold is. Two, the gold has been very important in maintaining the RSF as well. The RSF is a paramilitary group, and it really only exists because it's able to control the gold trade and use that to pay its soldiers, buy its guns, get its resources. So that's so like it's almost like there's a national economy that the RSF is working on, and the UAE is just trying to find a way to trade with this particular group, and it has a vested interest in the RSF. Like as it works with the RSF more, it develops this interest in the RSF maintaining itself and winning eventually. Yeah. And as the UAE is building its connections, the Saudi Arabian government acts almost as a counterbalance. And what the Saudi Arabian government has done is it's also been pulling in many of its other allies into the mix. So Egypt, Pakistan, and Turkey are now involved in the conflict in a way that they haven't um, have been getting drawn into the conflict. And this is part of the reason why it's really important to know what's going on in Sudan, because we're right now, maybe we've always lived in this world where a conflict that happens in any part of the world connects with all the others that exist. And these countries that I'm pointing to here, um, they're all involved in other conflicts as well. They're not limited to Sudan. There's Turkey with the Armenia Azerbaijan issue, whether Egypt's concern about the politics of the Nile links, like for Egypt, it connects to Sudan, but it also connects to Ethiopia and Eritrea, which is another conflict very close by, and yet we need a completely new talk in order to understand what's going on. And Pakistan and India, we don't need to explain how Pakistan has been involved with various other conflicts. Um, and again, just because we're talking to Bangalore for Justice and Peace, I think it's also important to pull in how Israel has been implicated in this contract. Over the past few years, Israel has been getting closer to the UAE. There's actually been a lot of those. Since the establishment of the Abraham Accords, um, one of the things that was talked about as a major step forward for peace in the Middle East, by which they mean Israel goes uncontested, um, is the UAE has become Israel's largest trading partner and has had many joint defense projects with Israel. And the Saudi Arabian government, though it cannot and will not oppose Israel directly, mainly because of the network of allies that it works with, it does play this kind of game with the Israeli with regards to Israel, and it's more concerned about a growing Israeli influence on us. On one level, Israel can displace Saudi Arabia as its primary Western, like kind of it teeters on that, and There's also the Saudi versus the UAE issue that's going on right now. But they can't directly fight. They can't directly fight with the UAE, so they don't can't directly fight with Israel because of this network of alliances that they have with all of these countries have with Western powers. So what do? They take it out on other countries. They fight in Yemen. They've like Yemen. I was doing when I was doing stories on Yemen. Like it's one of the poorest countries in the world. Average life expectancy in the late 30s. It's that kind of country. And it's not that far away from. It's not a question of worrying about regions because like Yemen also borders Saudi Arabia.
Saudi.
Yeah, it's not like they're afraid. It's not that they're upset of getting into war with Israel or UAE because they're close. It's just because like of a network of alliances where some countries are protected and some countries are not. And that's yeah. So right now there's this kind of weird power play that's happening by these many very strong, very rich, uh, very militarily powerful countries in the Middle East who have a lot of support from the West, just taking out fights and playing out fights in areas that are around. And Sudan is one example of it. Palestine is another example of that. Yemen is another example of that. The way in which these conflicts are, where you have the Middle East being kind of this weird mix of extremely rich and elite people, mixed with people who are basically bombed to the Stone Age. It's this is the situation that's going. So this is pretty much the end of my section on the geopolitics of it. Um, just take a short breather, and then we'll talk a little bit about the history of Sudan specifically. I kind of want to make broader points saying that while the current events of what's going on are really important, really disturbing, we'll have to also wake up to the fact that the war that's been going on in Africa, in Sudan specifically, is a result of is are decades in the making. They're not things that just happened overnight. Um, and I also want to present a perspective that doesn't see this as something like I don't want to play into this idea that Africa is just a place of conflict or wars always happen in Africa or like this very racist idea that but that if we actually understood the context under which why wars happen have happened in Sudan, that maybe we would have a better response for it, a more nuanced response to what's going on. So if you don't mind, I just want to take about a minute, a few minutes.
Sure.
Yeah, yeah. So just pause for a little bit. Um, yeah, I just kind of said a lot of things. so, so, okay, so I'll start up on that. Okay, so um, when I read about the the first time I had written an article on Sudan was back in 2019, and 2019 was a very interesting year because it was the year of what we call the Sudanese Revolution. Um, there was a huge mass uprising that was just going across the entire country. It was a hashtag Blue for Sudan was big that year. And you see,
Revolution against?
I'll explain. I'll explain. But basically, it was a huge decentralized mass protest that has come up in Sudan, as we've heard stories in so many other countries. We've heard about these things in Tunisia and Algeria and all these sorts of things. But yeah, this was one of those big uprisings. And you saw pictures of Sudanese women standing on top of jeeps giving speeches saying that, like, no more, end to the dictatorship, end to the dictator Omar al Bashir, who was the leader of Sudan at that point in time. And unfortunately, that story goes in a way that we've seen in Syria, in the case of Egypt, in the case of Tunisia, many of these those where shortly after these upsurges, the leader kind of steps down, but then a new military dictatorship comes up in response to that. And almost get the feeling like there was no point to the whole thing. Um, but then when you go back into the history of Sudan, you realize that I think we said this month marks the 70th anniversary. So in 70 years of Sudanese history, they've had a total of 11 years without a civil war. It's quite bad. Just after independence, a Sudanese civil war breaks out, and it goes on straight through to the 70s. And there's a government that comes up, and the Nimeri government comes up after that. And then there's another civil war that breaks out in the 80s. And this leads to the rise of Omar al Bashir as the ruler of Sudan. And towards the end of the civil war, it all gets concentrated in Darfur, which is where most of the current conflict is going on. And that continues until Omar al Bashir is overthrown. And in a few years later, the civil war breaks out. The current civil war breaks out. So it's like very like it's a series of wars that are going on. Um, I just put out a graph as to how many people have died in conflict since the late 80s. Um, there's the war in Darfur is where that big spike in the middle comes from, and then towards the end you see yet another spike that's coming up, which corresponds with the current war that's going on. But it's been going on for quite some time. Um, okay, so I want to give some context to how this all happened, and why this all happened, and why war seems to keep coming up in Sudan. So Sudan was a British colony, but it was the way British imperialism worked is usually the command centers were very layered. So, for example, Yemen was actually ruled from the Bombay presidency, and Sudan was ruled through Egypt. Egypt was the one that was. The British had this um, dream of controlling a strip of land that went from the north of Africa to the south of Africa in the before World War II. They said we want a strip of land that connects Cairo to Cape Town. Um, and because of various negotiations and then eventually conflicts with the Germans, there's this area of Namibia that they're not able to capture. But like they basically wanted to hold, but they basically held what is now Egypt, Sudan, and it just kind of keeps going south. But Egypt is the central command points that, and to understand a lot of post-colonial politics, one thing is really important to understand is how was the army formed. So when you colonize a country, you're not forming an army just to protect your borders. You're actually forming an army to control the local population as well. And the British engaged in a divide and rule policy in Sudan, mostly pitting Arabs and/or Muslims against Christians and/or tribals. That was kind of the way in which it goes on. So while there's not a big focus of this talk, um, if you see the map of Sudan right now, you'll see there's Sudan and there's South Sudan. South Sudan has been primarily a Christian majority, a tribal majority region that wanted to break off from Sudan after decades of what it perceived as supremacy and hegemony from the North Arab Muslim side that's been going on, and the Arab population is disproportionately represented in the military. That's there were when the independence struggle took place, there were two broad threads that were going on. One was a side that was pushing for Nile unity, and one was concerned of Egyptian hegemony. So it was a kind of a counter, saying that. So one said that like there should be a country that unites Egypt, Sudan, Ethiopia, like this entire area. That was one vision of it, and the other vision was saying that we don't want to be now ruled by the Egyptians. So we want to have a separate country. And I'm not sure exactly what the politics is, because like if you look from the Middle East, the strongest anti-colonial movements were actually coming from Egypt at the time. So I don't know if that played a role in the partition or not. Yeah. So almost immediately after independence, there is a mutiny that comes uh, in response to what is perceived as Arab dominance, and this leads to the first civil war that happens in Sudan. Many um, battles that are being fought specifically on that, and this continues until an army commander, Nimeri, takes power in Sudan in the late 1960s. Initially, Nimeri was influenced by many other post colonial leaders that were happening at this point in time, where he was pushing for kind of a broad, secular Arab, slightly socialist imagination that was going on. But as he was in power over time, he would try to make more appeals to the more conservative elements of Sudanese society. It becomes more of it becomes more what's the word I'm trying to figure what the word I'm looking for is. But he basically appeals to that particular call that's going on. This at different points in time helps him in his relationship with his West, and then later goes against his relationship with the West. There's a kind of there's a time period at this point in time, especially after the OPEC epidemic, where the West gets it starts off seeing these theological governments in like the UAE, Saudi Arabia as their allies, and then they kind of turn against them in the 1980s, mostly, where they say that the Irani civil war happens, the OPEC embargo happens, and it kind of moves against them. So, but Nimeri's in power at this point in time, and the West starts supporting and selling arms at this point in time to many of the tribal and Christian separatist groups uh, that are there. And this leads to the second uh, Sudanese civil war, which goes on from the 80s. By the end of the second civil war, one military commander, Omar al-Bashir, takes over, and he becomes the ruler of Sudan from 1989 till 2019. The Sudanese, so like decades, he's in power. Um, After the Cold War, um, especially there was a lot of overproduction of arms that was happening like across the world, as like the world was preparing for an eventual war for decades on end. And there's suddenly this need to like offload a lot of these weapons that go on, and they sell most of these things to Sudan. Sudan is they called, I think it was one article says they called Sudan the world's arms dump, where basically they would sell it to rebel groups, military groups, the Sudanese military. All these things are coming up at this point in time. So the civil war that broke out, I mean, it's partly funded or partly enforced because of this huge arms flow that just goes off to Sudan. And this is one of the major reasons why Africa is always kind of in a state of war. It seems like it's always in a state of war because there's this global machinery that just develops all these arms and just keeps selling them to different African groups that are fighting regarding borders that um, they had no say in how those borders were formed. Um, and this is something that happens everywhere. I mean, if you look at even in India, all of our armed conflicts are on the border. Like it's about how our borders ultimately get shaped and made. And then when you have this global industrial complex that just keeps selling arms, it eventually leads to a stage of almost perpetual war that just could never be overcome.
And this is true of many countries in Africa.
This is true for many countries. This is true for Ethiopia. This is true for into that. In fact, things get worse in the 2000s. So what happens in the 2000s is that the United States engages in what's called the War on Terror, where it um, makes a lot of arrangements with air. Like, so there's a region that kind of starts from Afghanistan and goes all the way to Nigeria, where, for various historical reasons, there are a lot of these militant Islamicist groups that um, that are fighting, and they're fighting with the local government. They usually take the way they manage to survive is that they take over area and they create kind of a local economy, the way the RSF did, and they usually work in the hinterland regions where the major cities are not, and it created a situation where, in the war on terror, the United States basically gave a lot of funding and a lot of economic support to the militaries of the governments that are there. And those militaries have become so powerful that they took over. Sudan is an example of that. It's where the military just became so powerful that it could just take over the country, making use of legitimate unrest that's happening in the local population because they feel that the governments have kind of forgotten about them. Yeah. Sorry, that was a slight tangent. I was going back to the war on Sudan. Yeah, there was a civil war that continues until the 1980s. Then Omar al-Bashir comes to power, and then in 2003, there is military unrest that's happening in the western part of Sudan, where many groups, uh, which are associated with various ethnic communities that are there, um, they start rebelling against a feeling of oppression and marginalization by the of the non-Arab populations of Sudan, and they encounter resistance from the Sudanese armed forces. But another group, which is called the Jinjaweed, the Jinjaweed translates from Arabic as the Jinn's horse riders. It has an idea of like the devil's riders. Those, and this were militias that were basically um, so most of the tribal groups were involved in farming. So the Jinjaweed were recruited from nomadic Arab communities that were there at that point in time. I think they originally had some connection with the Libyan government, um, but the Sudanese government hired them basically to help them in their fight against these insurgencies by non-Arabic groups. The Jinjaweed were very brutal. They basically just started targeting non-Arab groups to as part of a genocidal campaign against that. And this resulted in an international criminal court case against Omar al-Bashir for crimes against humanity. Um, a court case that never saw its way through because now he's no longer in power, and the case never really went through. But this was a genocide that happened like decades ago, and it's still like it's just intensified since then. It's something that people here have actually had to deal with quite a bit. Let's give a little bit of a map that I'm hoping kind of explains a little bit about what's going on. So these are various ethnicities that exist in Western Sudan. The Fur, the Masalit, the Zagwa. I think I said at the beginning of the talk about how there was a massacre of some dozens people of the Zagwa community as a result of the RSF. That's pretty much these are pretty much the areas that they've been going at, all in the Darfur region.
This is Western.
This is Western. Yeah. So on the left side, I've got the map of Sudan. If you see that kind of not squarish, it starts off as a square and then becomes a more natural shape. That map has been amplified on the right side of it. These are the different groups that have been going. They exist. They're not religiously. They'll be a mix of tribal and Muslim. There have been. Uh, this is a problem with studying Sudan as an outsider. Is like the deeper you go into it, you learn you learn just the surface of whatever's going on in the community. Many of them, supposedly have a caste system that's practiced amongst themselves. There's I don't want to like glorify what they are. There's also like there's been a history of nationalist struggles and calls from within various communities, um, which if you go to the Wikipedia pages, you'll see like many of their flags um, put up. There's a whole like there's a long, very rich history that's going on here, and from the point of view of social justice, it's kind of hard to get into many of the inner details of it. But the short version is that they've been targeted by the Rapid Support Forces as part of a genocidal campaign, which in something that has clearly been going on for decades. That's the basic and most important thing that one wants to take from this. Um, So, who is this Rapid Support Forces, and why are they why are they engaged in this genocide? As I said before, it comes from an Arabic word which means the genie's horsemen. They were armed by the Sudanese government initially when the Sudanese government was now the Sudanese government when it was taking part in the on the attacks on Darfur. They pretty much needed to go beyond the law in order to do that. So it's not that they could just use their armed forces; they were actually hiring a lot of mercenaries. There are even stories of mercenaries coming, like more recent conflict. The stories of mercenaries coming from Russia, mercenaries coming from Colombia, from different parts of the world. The biggest is the Rapid Support Forces. When they won the war on Darfur, there was an understanding that they would be integrated into the Sudanese army.
Hmm.
Um, but that hasn't fully happened, mostly because Hemeti was the leader of the RSF, was afraid of losing some sense of autonomy through the whole thing. We actually wanted to keep that autonomy going. Um, I said earlier that Omar al-Bashir
This
was
photo is
Hemeti.
Hemeti.
Yeah. So, yeah, there's been a long list of like international criminal court cases that have been coming across with regards to us. I don't think anything has really been done. Um, um, but like, I mean, many of these people have been indicted. There've been various things, not just Omar al-Bashir, but even many leaders within the RSF have been indicted. But again, we don't really see much that's gone on from there. Yeah. So the tensions between the RSF, the SAF, and Omar al-Bashir were kind of things that were going on in the background. I was saying that military governments have becoming more powerful within military factions have become more powerful within it, and RSF is this paramilitary thing that has its own source of power that's going on. What they did is they took advantage of the 2019 Sudanese revolution. This is a picture of uh, yeah. So I was talking about this. Like, it was a picture of like women giving speeches, and I think there was one famous one that there were like fires behind them. They were standing out, speaking out in jeeps, and there was this idea that like Sudan was going through like a genuine revolution that was going on. But this revolutionary fervor weakened Omar al-Bashir and created a context where Burhan and Hemedi could join forces and institute a military coup against Omar al-Bashir and take him down. So there was a period of time where there was like a lot of hope and fervor, and then like suddenly it just kind of goes to pieces after that. Um, so yeah, so these guys come to power after that, and yeah, that leads into the current conflict that's going on. These guys were supposed to find a way to create a common government. Seemed like they were not able to make those deals down, so they start just going out into full out war. RSF, ironically, goes is powerful in the places where it does not have a constituency, mainly because it controls a lot of resources in the West. That's where it gets a lot of its international support from. The SAF, seen internationally as a counterforce, manages to keep control of us. They're fighting back and forth. Stories of brutalities are breaking out every day, and yeah, there's nothing more that we can do or say about that. Um, So I just want to wrap up. I don't want to wrap up on a good note because this is something that's ongoing and it'll keep going on. We're in a place right now where um, broader interest, broader awareness, broader knowledge is hard to come up. I've just given this very long, wordy, detailed presentation, and I know it's hard to take in most of what I've said. It's hard to take in. There's just so many details, so many things. We have difficulty even keeping track of what goes on in India. Keeping track of what goes on in another country is very difficult. So I just wanted to kind of put like these 4 points as kind of like my ending points on the whole thing. One is that civil war is going on. There's no end in sight. But if we're trying to understand what's going on, we have to realize that war is something that has come partly as a result of our colonial legacies and partly as a result of our inability to deal with militaries as an institution. And that's basically what I think is what's happened in Sudan. It is a country that has a certain kind of ethnic relationship. There's a certain kind of communal relationship that exists in Sudan that you can understand in terms of its colonial legacy, and because of a predisposition to relying on the military and how the military has been able to become powerful, and the things that we accept the military to do that are outside of the law. That's basically what has led to the outbreak of civil war. There's an international law framework which one can refer to and understand and study. But there's been a problem in Africa in general, but Sudan specifically, in implementing any of these sorts of things. If I were to try to figure out what I want to do next and what I think is an important thing is, I think the most important thing going forward is always about raising awareness. In India, we don't really know what's going on. In Africa, it is a difficult thing to raise awareness about. Most people will agree with the broad issues. There's a humanitarian issue, but the details are really hard to figure out. And when these conflicts break out, and I've seen this in working with the human rights movement for over a decade. We tend to think of things in terms of good guys and bad guys, but we can only understand things as in terms of good guys and bad guys until we do our homework. We need to understand what's been going on before we can do it. So this awareness building, education is actually what I think is the most important thing going forward. So, yeah, I'll end with the flag of Sudan as a show of solidarity with the people that's there. For those of you who've been listening, thank you.
There are 5 people who are listening online.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I hope you've gotten something from this talk. I hope this is the beginning of something that sparks new conversations going forward. And yeah, that's it. Kind of back to Aishwarya.
Thank you all for joining us. Hopefully, we carry on with organizing similar conversations about other very severe crises within the African continent and educate ourselves on the issues that are going on there. Thank you for joining.